You think your parents love you unconditionally? Think again. There's a legal weapon some families use that can control you from beyond the grave, and it's probably more common than you realize. Picture this. You're 25 years old. Your dad just passed away. You're grieving. Then, the lawyer reads the will, and there's a condition. A simple one, really. You just can't marry someone of a different race, or maybe you can't be gay, or you have to stay in the family business forever. Break the rule, you lose everything. Your inheritance, your trust fund, the house you grew up in. Everything your parents built goes to someone else, or worse, to charity. This isn't some medieval drama. This is happening right now in modern families with modern money, and there's a name for it: disinheritance clauses. And some of the wealthiest families in the world have been using them to puppet string their kids for generations. Let me tell you about the Shapira case first, because it's one of the most famous examples of how dark this can get. Israel Shapira was a wealthy man. He had money, property, investments, the kind of wealth that changes lives. He also had very specific ideas about who his children should marry. When he wrote his will, he included what his lawyer probably called a conditional request, but let's call it what it really is: control. The rule was simple. His daughter could only inherit if she married within the Jewish faith and had a Jewish wedding. That's it. Marry someone Jewish, get the money. Marry someone who isn't, get nothing. Now, his daughter fell in love, but the man she loved wasn't Jewish. She had a choice to make: love or money, her future or her father's demands. She chose love, and just like that, she was cut off, disinherited. Her father's wealth, the money that could have secured her life, sent to charity instead. She didn't just accept it, though. She fought back, took it to court, argued that the clause was discriminatory, that it violated public policy, that you shouldn't be able to control someone's life like that, especially after you're dead. The case went all the way up, and you know what the court said? The clause was valid. They ruled that her father had the right to give his money to whoever he wanted, under whatever conditions he wanted, and if she didn't want to follow those conditions, that was her choice, but the money, that wasn't hers to claim. Let that sink in for a second. A court of law said it was perfectly fine for a parent to dangle financial security over their child's head and yank it away if they didn't obey. And here's the thing, this isn't rare. This happens all the time in all kinds of families, for all kinds of reasons. It's just that most of these cases never make it to court. Most people just comply. They follow the rules. They give in. Because fighting means risking everything, and most people can't afford that. So let's talk about why this happens. Why do parents do this? Some people will say it's about values, that parents want to make sure their legacy continues in a certain way, that they worked hard for their money and they want it used according to their beliefs. And sure, maybe that's part of it, but let's be real. This is about control. It's about making sure that even after they're gone, they still have a say in how you live your life. Think about it. If you really loved your child, if you really wanted what was best for them, would you threaten to take away their security unless they lived exactly how you want it? Or would you trust them to make their own choices? These clauses aren't just about money, they're about power. They're about making sure your kids stay in line even when you're not around to enforce it. And the scary part? They work. There are people right now living lives they don't want because of a clause in a will, staying in marriages they hate, working jobs they despise, hiding who they really are. All because if they don't, they lose everything. Let me tell you about another case. This one's from the UK. A man named Malcolm Johnson died and left his entire estate to his two sons, millions of pounds, property, investments, the works. But there was a catch. They couldn't contest the will. If either of them challenged it in court, they'd be cut out entirely. Now, one of the sons thought the will was unfair. He believed his father wasn't in the right state of mind when he wrote it. He wanted to challenge it, but he couldn't, because the second he did, he'd lose everything. So he had a choice: accept what he thought was an unjust will, or fight for what he believed was right, and risk getting nothing. He accepted it, because what else could he do? That's the power of these clauses. They don't just control what you get, they control whether you can even question it.
And it gets worse, because these clauses aren't just about religion or marriage. Sometimes they're about careers. There are families where the inheritance is tied to staying in the family business. You want the money? You work for the company. You take over when dad retires. You don't get to chase your dreams or do what makes you happy. You do what the will says. Or sometimes it's about location. You have to live in a certain city. You can't move abroad. You have to stay close to the family estate. Your life, your choices, all dictated by a piece of paper written by someone who's dead for years. There was a case in Australia where a father left his fortune to his son, but only if his son never got divorced. The son got married young. The marriage fell apart. He was miserable, but he stayed for decades because leaving meant losing millions. He stayed in a broken marriage because his dead father told him to. Think about that. A ghost holding your life hostage. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but these are rich people problems. I don't have a trust fund. This doesn't affect me. But here's the thing. It's not just the ultra-wealthy doing this. Middle-class families do it too. Maybe it's not millions of dollars. Maybe it's the family home, or a small inheritance, or a business. But the principle is the same. Obey or lose it. And even if you're not dealing with this personally, it's worth understanding because it shows something dark about how we think about family, money, and control. There's this idea that parents own their children's futures, that because they brought you into the world, because they raised you, they get to decide how you live your life. And the law backs that up. In most places, you have almost total freedom to put whatever conditions you want in your will. You can be as controlling, as manipulative, as cruel as you want, and the law will enforce it. There are some limits. In some places, you can't disinherit your spouse entirely. In some places, you have to leave something to your kids. But those protections are weak, and they're easy to get around. And when it comes to conditional bequests, the law is almost entirely on the side of the person who wrote the will. Which brings us to the question, should this be legal? There are people who argue no. They say that disinheritance clauses are a form of abuse, that they violate basic human rights, that you shouldn't be able to control someone from beyond the grave, that if you're going to leave someone money, you should leave it to them, no strings attached. And honestly, there's a strong case for that, because these clauses do real harm. They trap people in lives they don't want. They force people to hide who they are. They destroy relationships. They cause decades of resentment and pain. But then there's the other side, the people who say, it's my money, I earned it, I should be able to do whatever I want with it. And legally, they're right. In most places, you have complete freedom to distribute your estate however you see fit. You can leave it all to your cat if you want. You can leave it to a stranger. You can burn it. It's yours. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And here's what really gets me. These clauses are often framed as being about protecting family values or preserving a legacy. But what legacy are you really leaving if your kids remember you as the person who controlled them even after you were gone? What values are you teaching if you show your children that love is conditional and money is the weapon you use to enforce obedience? There's a case that haunts me. I read about it a few years ago. A woman whose father left her everything, but only if she never spoke to her mother again. Her parents had divorced when she was young. Bitter, awful divorce, and her father hated her mother so much that even after he died, he wanted to make sure they stayed apart. So this woman had to choose, her mother or her inheritance, the person who raised her or the financial security her father left behind. She chose the money, and she regrets it every single day. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you about these situations. The money doesn't make you happy. It doesn't fill the hole. It doesn't replace the relationships you lose or the life you give up. You might think it will. You might tell yourself that once you have the money, everything will be okay. But it's not, because you're living someone else's life. You're following someone else's rules, and no amount of money is worth that. But people do it anyway, because the alternative is scary. Giving up a fortune, walking away from security, choosing the unknown over the guaranteed. That takes courage, and most people don't have it. So they comply. They follow the rules. They live the life that was chosen for them, and they tell themselves it's fine, that it's worth it, that they made the right choice. But deep down, they know the truth. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because these clauses don't just affect the person they're aimed at, they affect entire families for generations. Let me explain. Say your grandfather puts a clause in your will. You have to stay in the family business to inherit. So you do. You take over the company. You hate it, but you do it. Then you have kids, and they grow up watching you be miserable. They see you trapped, and when it's your turn to write a will, what do? Some people break the cycle. They refuse to pass on the control. They leave their money with no strings attached because they know how much damage those strings can do. But others, they do the exact same thing. They put in their own conditions, their own rules, because that's what they learned. That's what family money means to them. Control. And so it continues, generation after generation. Kids controlled by parents who were controlled by their parents who were controlled by theirs. A chain of manipulation stretching back decades, all enforced by pieces of paper and the legal system. There are families where this has been going on for over 100 years, where every generation has had to live according to rules set by people who died before they were born, where the weight of the past is so heavy that nobody can escape it. And the saddest part? Most of these families are miserable. The money doesn't bring.
Some countries have started putting limits on what you can include in a will. France, for example, has very strict rules about inheritance. You can't just cut your kids out. You have to leave them a portion of your estate no matter what, and you can't put unreasonable conditions on it. Other places are starting to recognize that some clauses go too far. Courts in Canada and the UK have struck down conditions that are too controlling or that violate public policy. It's not common, but it's happening. But in most places, the law hasn't caught up. You can still put almost anything in your will, and it'll be enforced. Which means the real solution has to come from us, from families choosing to do better, from parents deciding that they'd rather trust their kids than control them, from people refusing to accept these conditions, even if it means walking away from money. Because here's the thing, these clauses only have power if we give them power. If everyone just said no, if people refused to live under these conditions, the whole system would collapse. But that's easy to say and hard to do, because saying no means giving up security. It means risking your future. It means potentially losing everything, and not everyone can afford that. Which is why this keeps happening, why families keep using these clauses, why people keep complying. It's a cycle, and cycles are hard to break. But they can be broken. I've read stories about people who walked away, who chose freedom over money, who said no to the conditions and built their own lives. And yeah, it was hard. Yeah, they struggled. But they were happy because they were living for themselves, not for a dead person's demands. And that's worth more than any inheritance. So if you're dealing with this, if there's a clause hanging over your head, know this. You have a choice. You always have a choice. It might not feel like it, the pressure might be enormous, but you can say no. And if you're thinking about putting one of these clauses in your own will, ask yourself this. Do you want your legacy to be love or control? Do you want your kids to remember you as someone who supported them or someone who manipulated them? Because that's what it comes down to. Love or control, trust or fear. Choose wisely. If this video made you think, check out the next one.